I'm happy to have Rodger on our OKR Institute podcast. Rodger is a successful OKR coach who helped many leading organizations worldwide in implementing OKRs. Rodger, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Dirk. Well, it's really great to be here. Yes, you're right. I do a lot of work around OKRs. In fact, my whole team do. We are Verbi Giants. That's our company, and yeah, we work with clients literally from one side of the world to the other on helping them to implement OKRs. And helping them to achieve, greater agility, greater responsiveness, greater alignment as a result of the implementation of those OKRs.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rodger. I have a lot of questions for you, but let's limit it to 3 questions. So what our customers, clients are very interested in knowing. The first question, what is your experience when implementing OKRs in organizations in different European countries or worldwide? Are there any cultural aspects to be considered?
Yes, because culture is a massive part of OKRs. What I often see is that organizations approach OKRs in a bit of a sort of 2-dimensional way, and the addition, and they forget about the whole cultural aspect which is needed to make OKRs work really well, because otherwise you really don't get the transparency, you really don't get the willingness to test and experiment, to potentially fail, so long as it's intelligent failure, failure that you learn and adapt from. There's big cultural elements within those, and if there is a culture where there's perhaps been a degree of punishment, a degree of reprimand if they have fallen short, for instance, in the past, then that can really damage the safety that people might feel to want to test out new experiments that might not necessarily completely achieve 100%. So there are some important cultural factors to be borne in mind. Now, you asked about differences between countries and regions. From what I've observed and what I've experienced, I would say there's in Northern Europe, and I'm including Germany in this, what I see is that there's a very, very OKRs are really popular, and this is purely my theory. There is a desire I've observed to really have a process to stick to and a structure. So what I've experienced in working with companies in Germany is that they like to be quite dogmatic, quite rigid around the structure for that can be in place for OKRs. But what I do see is that there's often a real willingness to test there. So to perhaps take the risk that you might fall short, but in the knowledge that you'll get some good learning from that and that you'll improve in the next cycle. Here, let's just contrast that with here in the UK. What I see in the UK is I see a desire to sometimes, dare I say, I'm probably not speaking well of my fellow countrymen here, but to try and shortcut things. So there's often oh, how hard can it be type of attitude here, and just jump straight into using OKRs and without sort of pausing for thought and understanding kind of what's involved in it. It's more than just writing your goals in an OKR structure and putting a system in place. So I have seen unrealistic, I would say, expectations around what OKRs can do for an organization, particularly here in the UK. And they've just jumped in, thought it was going to change things. It hasn't. And they've then said, OKRs don't work. So I would argue in that situation, OKRs do work It's just that you've not used them right.
Okay.
It's about how you use them. I also noticed that in the UK there is, I think, a greater reluctance to test, and I think there's a general sense that the level of psychological safety is perhaps somewhat lower. When you say to people, how do you feel about that key result? It's an aspirational one. You might not actually fully achieve it. That can be really uncomfortable for some people. And like I was saying, because of previous experiences. I've done some work in South America, in particular in Argentina, and I don't know whether this is the Latin spirit, but there is that I was absolutely amazed at the sheer enthusiasm, actually, and the greatest level of enthusiasm that I've experienced in clients was working with clients in Argentina who just wanted to soak up and learn so much, and then just wanted to practice it and apply it. And I'm not saying that other regions, other clients in other regions were not showing that, but it was the enthusiasm that just set them apart. There was a degree of spirit there, I think, that was really, really a joy to work with, to be perfectly honest. So I think there are some cultural factors in play. I'll be honest, we have done some work in Asia, but it's been mainly focused around Singapore, which I know is kind of a melting pot of cultures. I'm really curious, and I don't know if you know about this, Dirk, but I'm really curious to understand how popular OKRs might be in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of requests from, for example, Singapore, also Malaysia in the startup scene, but from Japan so far there is a few requests. I think it could be the language, of course, and to approach it in the right way. But we see the most demand at the moment from Singapore. Japan, I think maybe it takes a little bit more time, or you need to enter the country also in the right language. So that's something for sure we have to look into it. And of course, I think the Japanese culture, how it's organized, it also in the corporate world, it's totally different compared to the rest of the Asian countries, and also of course to Europe. But I think what you just said, Rodger, is very interesting also from an OKR coaching point of view, because the OKR technical framework, I mean, that's kind of given, but the performance culture in a country, but also in the organization, is always different. So I think that makes OKR coaching very interesting. So for my next question would be, what is your recommendation to run successfully sustainable OKR cycles in organizations? Because also, of course, people, what you said in Latin America, they are very enthusiastic at the beginning, but maybe after a while, if they experience also maybe a couple of failures with OKRs and they need to adjust the OKRs, what do you recommend, and how do you recommend it to organizations to make OKR a sustainable success?
So I would always say the sustainability element really starts with how you kick them off, how you start them. Because if you, and this is part of what I was saying about sort of how I've observed the approach in the UK, where they just go, right, let's just do it across the board, let's just start them and do them, everybody's doing them. And what you end up with is a failed approach, which then tarnishes the name, the reputation, the image of OKRs, and it starts to put blockers in the way to any further adoption. So my first step to sustainability would be to just do a pilot. just do a pilot to prove the concept and make sure that as part of that proof of the concept, you are communicating the value that the teams and the business are seeing from this out to the wider audience, so that they can see what the benefits are going to be for doing OKRs, because that changes the energy around OKRs from one of here's the next new thing that you need to do, and being pushed onto teams and pushed onto people, to when are we doing that? When are we starting? So it changes the energy from push to pull. And so in terms of manage that, I mean, and that's general change management, but it's amazing how much in OKRs that's overlooked. It is amazing how much it's overlooked. So sustainability starts with how you kick them off, and then as you're phasing, you know, I once you've proved the concept, I wouldn't then say put them straight across the rest of the teams in the organization. What I would say is implement them in phases, because it's like a flywheel. It's like you want the flywheel effect, you know, and a flywheel takes a lot of energy to start it going round, but as it goes round, it starts to go around under its own energy, and it starts to build, and it gets faster and it gets faster and it gets faster. So you can build up that flywheel effect by making sure that the value is constantly transparent. So the value of using them is recognized by the wider business, is also felt and acknowledged by the teams themselves, and that you have the ability, and this should be done through a good retrospective process, but you also have the ability to, or you give the teams the ability to potentially change, or certainly recommend changes to the use to how they use OKRs, because OKRs as a way of working, you know, we call it you can call it an organizational system, if you will. You know, there is this principle of system decay over time, and if you don't keep investing in the system and making sure that the system, not just the software system, but the system being the whole way that this works within the organization, is not just maintained, but is invested in, and is developed and enhanced so that it remains current and continues to add value, then that's what makes, you know, an OKR, you know, OKRs as a way of working sustainable. And then you've got the sort of tactical things which you can do about obviously making sure that there's lots of recognition, you know, for people who are doing it really well, teams that are role modeling great behaviors around OKRs. Excuse me. So I think there's some more strategic activities which you can do to sustain them, and then I think there's more there's also things that you can do at the tactical level as well.
How interesting. You were mentioning also, I mean, starting with a pilot team. So how big should that team be, and who would you get involved in this pilot team, Rodger?
So it depends. I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios. So and what it depends on is how the organization is structured. In some organizations, it makes sense to do a particular, I'm not going to say function, because it's typically a value stream that we work with. I'll give you an example, right? We work with a retailer here in the UK who has, excuse me, teams. Their business is arranged by brands, okay, but within those brands, there are people from different functions. So there'll be somebody from marketing, there'll be somebody from products, there'll be somebody from supply chain, and so on and so forth. You know, it's very much like it's very much a tribes and squads type model, even though they don't use those particular terms. And in that particular instance, it made sense for them to pilot